So, Edward, I first read about you in a review of the Wall Street Journal, and I thought it was amazing what they said. So, we have a title of a book, Learning from Ludicrous. Who here knows what ludicrous means? Raise your hand. So, tell us about where's the title Ludicrous come from, Edward?
Famously, right, Tesla came out with an insane mode on their cars, which made them go even faster than they already were. And then Ludicrous was the next step of that. It was the absolutely fastest.
It's faster than any Porsche I've had. I'm on my third Tesla, and I found your book to be fascinating about your description of Tesla. Tell us, how did Elon Musk get from PayPal to Tesla as we go through your program today?
Yeah, well, he has always been fascinated, I think, with electric cars, the possibility of electric cars. He actually briefly went to Stanford to study supercapacitors, which are kind of like a battery, only they sort of are able to discharge power much faster, but not stored as long. He stopped that, though, to go to start Zip2, which is his first successful company.
That was his first.
Yeah, the internet was just a huge opportunity at that time, so he jumped on that. But I think he's always wanted to do something making real things, which he's done with rockets and electric cars. And he put all the money he made from PayPal basically into those two companies.
Well, he's a very complicated guy because he had the paper today, the journal, it's about his purchasing $100 million worth of houses in Bel Air. He's in a lawsuit in downtown Los Angeles on a slander libel charge, and then SpaceX had a successful launch yesterday. So have you met him?
I haven't actually met him. No. As you may read in the book, Tesla is not a huge fan of mine. They have a hard time, I think, with criticism, even if that criticism is constructive. But as the slide deck shows, it's the title of the book is Ludicrous, and I put here learning from Ludicrous, 10 lessons Tesla teaches about the future of mobility. And I did that because I really, it's such a heated topic, Tesla, especially on the internet. You're either a lover or a hater.
We had hate mail when it was announced that I was having you from the Tesla
I'm
Motor
not surprised
Club.
at all. I'm not surprised at all.
So tell us, so we have, your book is 10 lessons. I loved your book. You all got to enjoy reading this. But tell us about the high-tech revolution that's changing cars for the better.
So these are lessons that I think, if you look at Tesla from both the good and the bad, it's really important because there's a lot to learn about how the future of cars and mobility is going to shape out. And that's really why it's important to understand the bad, or the stuff Tesla has struggled with, as well as the stuff it's done really well. So starting out, the high-tech revolution is changing cars for the better, as you said. I think that's the part of this that's easiest to see as a consumer. People love their Teslas, and this was a car that the auto industry wasn't just making. It took someone new.
When was the last time there was a startup of a car company in the U.S.?
Well, a successful, so there's been DeLorean fairly recently, relatively recently, and that was in the 80s, and that was not successful. So the most recent, truly successful car startup was Chrysler, which I think was the 20s or 30s.
Late 20s.
And so that's one of the most important things Tesla's done is it's proved that, something that everyone thought was impossible up to that point could be done. You could come in, start a new car company, and have a really huge impact on the
made
business
in California
and the market.
And how many cars have they sold year to date since they started production in 2012?
About 850,000, so a little less than 1 million.
Well, that's good, isn't it?
It is good. Again, the fact that this company is even around. Before Tesla, anybody who said, and Elon Musk has said, when I told people I was starting a car company, they told me I was crazy. And frankly, he was crazy. You would not do this as a way to make money.
And why is that?
Because the car business is capital intensive and low margin. It takes a huge amount of money to design a car, make it comply with all of the laws, have a retail, stores everywhere to sell and service it, then to build the manufacturing, designing the manufacturing system, investing in the manufacturing system, building the supply chain, which stretches around the world, and then making all of these things work together in a business where you're not even making much margin on each vehicle that you sell. It's really, really, really hard. And for 100 years now, there was a time when there were hundreds of car companies. And now if you go on Wikipedia, there's a list of defunct American car companies. There's over 1,000 of them.
And so there's also, it's highly federally regulated,
Yeah.
from emissions controls to airbags to safety features, right?
Yeah, it's an incredibly tough, complicated business just on the regulatory side.
Well, in your book, you describe in great detail the manufacturing issues that Tesla had. And I kept sort of shouting in favor of Elon because wasn't he living on the factory floor and spending nights there? Yep. And they were, at one point, they were building some of the Teslas by hand.
Yep.
And I mean, you criticize this because they were promising perhaps more automation. But the fact is, almost 1 million cars have been made.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, look, Tesla has survived. And really, in the car business, the real prize is just surviving, right? If you're in a business where thousands of companies have gone under. But I think the reason that I worry about Tesla, and I think it's important to understand where they've fallen short, is that this company would not have survived unless investors were putting at least $1 billion into it every 12 to 18 months.
Well, let's start with, how did the Department of Energy get involved with Tesla? They gave the first loans. How did that come about?
How does any kind of big political thing come about, right? I think they knew that there was going to be this opportunity. Martin Eberhart, before Elon Musk was the CEO, was already appealing to Congress to put a program like that together. And then they had customers, including Rahm Emanuel's brother, and they were very careful to take care of those customers, and I think the good word went up, and they were able to get government loan.
Right.
Do you want to?
And so Tesla's filling a role that we didn't even realize had been unfilled.
Yeah, so I think this is something that people sometimes forget. Certainly people my age and younger, we don't remember from our own lives that the first half of the 20th century, Detroit was what Silicon Valley is today. It was.
Explain that.
Yeah, so it was like the center of huge economic activity. It had huge cultural power. And it showed people what the future was going to be like. People would go to the car show for the same reasons that people today go to like CES, right, Consumer Electronics Show. It was the thing that showed you what the future was going to be like, and the styling would change all the time. And it was just every year it would be a little bit different and a little bit more futuristic. And you could just go there and feel like you could almost touch the future.
Do you feel like the cars were sort of like planes? They were designed certain aspects of an airplane?
Yeah, so I read about this in the book, actually, when I was talking about Tesla's touchscreen, because it looks a lot like a smartphone, but it's also very different in certain ways, or cars are very different than smartphones in certain ways. And Detroit, in the 60s, they kind of tried to do two different things. They tried to, that tapped into the power of the other big technology at the time, which was aerospace. Right? And so they did two things. They actually made jet-powered cars. Chrysler worked on this for years, decades actually, including with government support. That was not very successful. So trying to make a car be more like an airplane in a meaningful way turned out to be a dead end. But putting tail fins on cars, putting lights on cars that looked like jet engines, putting the trappings of cars, it was a way to tap into the excitement around airplanes and rockets that existed at that time and sort of dress the car up in those looks. And I feel like Tesla does a similar thing in that they make the car look like a smartphone. The interface, right. If you use a smartphone, you can use that screen really, really well. Where that becomes a problem is when it becomes like they actually build it like a smartphone, in that a smartphone is, every engineering choice is a trade-off. And a smartphone is optimized for performance because you're trying to pack a lot of power, a computer that fits in your pocket. It's not optimized for reliability. And actually, we can talk about that, and I don't know.
All right.
We can jump through this. But the important thing I think about...
So what was that car?
That's actually a Tatra. It's not from Detroit. That's a Czech car. But it was super ahead of its time. And it had a rear-mounted V8, super streamlined. And I just picked it from a museum in Portland. And it's just very, very futuristic. And cars, over the last 30 years, we've lost, cars no longer sort of show us what the future is going to be. And people don't get as excited about them. And Detroit has lost its cultural power. And so when Elon Musk sort of started building these futuristic cars, it wasn't something brand new. It was actually something that had been a really important part of American culture and had been missing. And we just didn't realize it. It kind of disappeared, and we hadn't realized it until he
design
showed
from
up.
the 70s up till Tesla, they were the most boring designs I've ever seen. Corvette led the way, they lost it. All of the American designers seem to have lost the way. Cadillac can't figure out what they are.
Yeah, cars are really interesting because on the one hand, they're extremely rational. On the other hand, they're extremely emotional. And we kind of, even as a country, go back and forth between which of those is more important. Do we want, and so like in the 50s and 60s, this was like Detroit's Baroque era, and they were just chrome and tail fins and huge and giant V8s and land barges and just, music about Corvettes and things like that. And so this was like a really emotional period for cars. And then in the 70s, you had the oil crisis, you had environmental regulations, you had all this turmoil, economic problems. And as a country, we really shifted towards the more rational approach. We wanted to buy Honda Accords and Toyota Camrys and these unexciting but extremely reliable cars.
So how did Elon get to the designer who designed the Tesla? Let's start with the Model S. Well, the Roadster was more or less a Lotus.
Yeah.
So you talk about in your book the first Roadster. But the Model S, and I got one of the first ones. It was revolutionary for me. And then the Model X, I thought, with the gull-wing doors on the rear, I thought were extraordinary.
Yeah.
And the new Cybertruck.
Yep.
So tell us about who designed this. Who are the designers?
Yeah, so Franz von Holzhausen is the chief designer.
Say that again.
Franz von Holzhausen.
All right. Okay.
He was previously at Mazda.
All right.
I think he's
not known for their design.
Yeah, well, actually, their more recent stuff has gotten a lot better.
Okay.
It was kind of his. Anyway, he designed a bunch of different cars at a bunch of different companies.
Right.
But I think what Tesla did was really, and this is again like one of the sources of what Tesla's done really, really well is anything where you need to allow creative people to just be free and kind of pursue that startup kind of mentality where they can just go out there and take all the obstacles out of their way and let them sort of just push out the most creative, exciting, dynamic thing possible, and then sort of figure everything else around it. That's created these really good-looking cars with this really exciting technology.
Set on a battery pack.
Yeah.
So the battery packs is made by Panasonic?
The battery cells are made by Panasonic, and then Tesla takes those cells and assembles them into packs.
Okay. So is Tesla now building in China?
Their factory, I think they're just in sort of like pilot production right now in China.
And the car is very successful. My daughter lives in London, and on her street there are 8 Model S's.
Yep.
And in Norway, they have a house, and she says it's all Teslas in Norway. Is that true?
Yeah, so this actually takes us to one of the other lessons. It is really important, we were talking about them selling 850,000 cars. That's
amazing.
That's a big, and they've grown as a percentage.
How many cars a year do we sell in the U.S. and the world?
So in the U.S., we sell 17 million. We buy 17 million cars a year, a little over that. And the 3 biggest automakers, Toyota, Volkswagen, and General Motors, each of them alone, globally, sells about 10 million units.
Globally, wow.
So in 15 years, Tesla has almost sold 10% of what a big automaker sells in 1 year.
Wow.
And this is not to hate on Tesla. This is just reality. These are just numbers, right? And it's just important to remember that these things have a context. And so it is important to understand that, yes, Tesla has pushed things forward, and yes, they've had an impact on all different parts of the business and the market, but it's still a relatively small and premium
When you
thing.
say that in your book, you criticize Elon for promising a $35,000 Model X and not delivering it.
Yeah. So I think people think that the difference between making 30,000 cars that cost $100,000 making 30,000 of those a year, so small volume and high price, that it's kind of the same thing as building 1 million cars at $30,000 a unit. They're actually incredibly different. When you're in small volume and high prices, a lot of like the most expensive cars are literally built by hand. They're handmade, they're crafted. Whereas what matters in the premium market too is that you're distinctive. It's that the design and the technology is cutting edge and distinctive and says something about the person who buys it. The other end of that spectrum is where actually most cars are sold. which, when you buy a Honda Civic or whatever, like that doesn't really say anything about you, right? It says that, maybe you're
practical.
Maybe you're practical,
Right.
right? But then as, the business of that is very, very different. And so on a certain level, it seems like it makes sense for them to have this master plan where they start with really expensive cars and they get cheaper and more volume all the time. But in reality, it takes two fundamentally different cultures to make each of those businesses work, a premium brand and a mass market brand. And that Tesla clearly prioritizes the design, the technology, right, things like that. And like everything else, there's a cost. Everything is a trade-off, and what they trade off is the reliability, the initial quality, and just the efficiency of their operations. It's just the way they run their business. If you scaled it up tomorrow to 5 million units a year or something like that, it wouldn't work. I think one of the really, and I trained in this book a couple of times, really the kind of opposite, the counterexample to Tesla, which really illustrates sort of important things about the business, is Toyota. Right? Toyota is really the opposite of Tesla in a lot of ways. They went from they're also a relatively new car company. They're not 100 years old.
What did they make before?
They were in the loom business. They were an automatic loom company.
Textile business.
And they got into they wanted to get into the car business, and they got into the car business. And almost entirely since World War II, they went from being this loom company to becoming a 10 million unit a year, one of the biggest automakers. They did that without ever having the sexiest cars, the best looking cars, the fastest cars, and especially cutting edge technology. They never had cutting edge technology in their car. In fact, they were always known for being behind the curve, even compared to other automakers. And I think it's really important. We live in a very tech obsessed time. And for those of us who can afford the latest and greatest tech, we want that. But again, everything has a price. And every engineering decision has a trade-off. And for most people, a car is just a way to get from point A to point B. And because of that, they need it to be cheap. They need it to be utterly 100% reliable.
Get to work every
and when
day.
it does fix, they need to be able to take it somewhere very close and get it repaired for cheap and promptly so they can get to their job.
Well, let's talk about the sales of Teslas. What I was impressed with is that they're sold basically online, delivered. We have a delivery service center here in Cathedral City, and they do upgrades of your software by satellite. Is that catching on to other manufacturers?
Yeah, that's actually one area where Tesla has a really interesting advantage because they don't have franchise dealers and other car makers in the U.S.
So they must be saving a lot of money that way, making at least some of the profits going back to them.
Yeah, yes and no, because they would probably have more service locations if they did have franchise dealers, because franchise dealers would be investing their own money.
But Tesla had to build the Superchargers across the country. How many did they
their
build?
own stores.
How many?
I honestly don't know what the number is.
I met a guy the other day who has crossed the United States 9 times, coming from Boston to Palm Springs every season. And the first year was scary.
Yep.
After that, they've gotten used to where they've got a plan.
Yep.
And they say it works out very well.
Yeah. No, that was a really, really important thing, was that they have superchargers so that you can take an electric car anywhere. And I think it's really important, especially being at the cutting edge, because they had to convince people that this is a car.
Remember, Elon took his 5 sons and the first Model X to New York from Los Angeles and went on the Today Show.
Yeah, and
I love that.
What's frustrating though is that for every brilliant move like that, which I think in retrospect it's so obvious. If you're going to try and sell an electric car, really invest in the infrastructure so that people can use it. Yeah. For every brilliant thing that looks so obvious in retrospect, there's something that in retrospect too that you just look back and why? And with the superchargers, if you watch the event where he announced them in 2012, he said every single supercharger is going to be 100% solar powered. They're not going to be connected to the grid. They're going to generate more power than they actually, than the cars pull out of them. Not even one supercharger anywhere in the world qualifies to that. Now, it doesn't make the superchargers not a smart idea
they work. And
they work. They work.
And they're free.
But again, they were free. They're not anymore.
Not free anymore. Okay.
Not free anymore. But again, I think he's had to be over the top in order to make things work, right? Because this company has gotten into financial trouble a lot of times, and he's had to, as I write about in the book, he's had to do some things that weren't necessarily the greatest, and maybe this is one of them. But on the other hand, when you have something that's so good, why invite sort of the questions that come along by making huge promises and then not even coming close to delivering on it?
So in your book, you talk about DOE being involved with Tesla from the beginning with loans, I think.
Not from the beginning, but
and then,
from the Model S.
And then Daimler comes in,
Yeah.
and are they out? Is Daimler as a stockholder in Panasonic,
So
Toyota?
Toyota and Daimler were both. In fact, Elon Musk said that Daimler is really who saved Tesla, not the government.
Right.
And actually, I think that's so. Actually, I mean, this is sort of like the last deck in here, which is last.
I didn't mean to have you jump in.
No, that's fine. Oh, great. Okay.
No pictures of your
There
girlfriend.
we go. Which is that high-tech startups and industrial manufacturing companies need to learn to work together.
What does that mean?
What that means is if you look at the successes that Tesla's had, but then also where it's really come up short, it's done well because it's really embraced and leaned into bringing a high-tech startup culture to cars, which had never been done before. And that's why their design is so good. That's why their technology for their drivetrains is so good. It's why they have over-the-air updates. They really took a clean sheet and this creative approach. The reason that car companies don't take that approach is because they think after 100 years that just operating a business of that size and complexity is they're very operationally focused. And as a result, right, and these things trade off with each other because you either plan things out long in advance, you create a very methodical plan, and you stick to it so that all the pieces of the machine are all working together, or you drink a bunch of Red Bull and fix one problem, and then drink more Red Bull and fix another problem, and just kind of hack your way through.
It seems like that's what Elon was doing.
This is the Tesla approach.
So
and they hack their way through stuff, so they come up with creative solutions, but that regimentation, that order that you need with a 30,000 employee company, it hasn't been there.
Well, you've been to Fremont, to the factory. Tell us about the robots there and how that is that the most robotic factory? Are there other factories like that?
It's not even close to the most robotic factory.
Well, that's a disappointment.
Yeah, it is. It's a great story, right?
I loved it. I love watching it.
No, in the 1980s, General Motors said it was going to make a lights-out factory that was going to be completely automated. And it was a disaster. And basically what the auto industry has learned is that there are some things that automation is great for. And basically all the heavy, repetitive, boring jobs are all robots now and have been for decades. The problem is that humans are still really, really good at stuff. I was recently at Toyota City in Japan. I actually did a round-the-world tour of 8 different car factories last November.
Give us some impressions.
Well, it was amazing. I mean, it's too much, but I want to tell you about this Toyota, right? So the way that we, and I think Tesla, look at technology, where we look at technology and we see all these infinite possibilities, right? Like, oh man, it could do all these amazing things. That's how Toyota looks at people. And it's funny because going there and seeing that really emphasized how much we don't sort of think that about people. We kind of think, and this sort of gets to the autopilot stuff, we kind of think, well, humans are bad at driving or working or this or that. Let's just replace them with robots. And Elon famously eventually, so the Model 3, tried to build this completely automated production line. Built 2 of them. They didn't really work, and had to build a 3rd in a tent, and it ended up being
in a handmade.
Yeah, and very labor intensive. And he ended up saying humans are underrated, and I think they were underrated by him for sure. But if you go to Toyota, I mean, they just have these amazing things where instead of buying big expensive robots that are super complicated and are trying to replace a person, what they do is they have the people that are working on the line design their own unpowered automation. So for example, if you have a wrench and you're a bolt and you have to pick up your bolt and your wrench and go like this and then put it back, just this is what you're doing all day. Well, instead they have the bolt come out here and the wrench here, you bolt it, and then you put the wrench here, and then the weight of the wrench comes down, and that weight, there's a counterweight and a pulley, and it stages the next bolt and returns the thing to the place. And so it's like a not a Rube Goldberg machine because that's overly complicated. It's super, super simple. So instead of having, trying to replace a human with a really, really complicated robot, They have people make small incremental improvements to their workflows using the simplest possible automation. So it's kind of a distributed automation approach. It's a total opposite, and frankly, just as Tesla is the Tesla of design and electric car performance, Toyota is the Tesla of manufacturing. And to me, one of the real tragedies of Tesla's story is that they had this opportunity to work with Toyota and to work with Daimler, who is also...
I didn't understand why he pulled back from that.
Well, so it's
Tell us the story.
Yeah, it's a very hard story to get people to talk about because obviously there's a lot of tension and it was a weird situation because Toyota and Daimler were investing in Tesla.
Daimler saved.
Yeah, and they both and looked. Tesla got a factory from Toyota for nothing. Basically, it was
Fremont, California.
And I think that the tragedy there is that these cultures are very different. Like industrial manufacturing culture and high-tech startup culture are very different. And both of them have their own forms of arrogance. The car companies are arrogant because they've been around for 100 years in a lot of cases, and they're so big, and they make so many cars, and they manage all this complexity. And the startups are arrogant because they come out of nowhere, and they're young, and they're vibrant, and they're doing these exciting things, and shaking up established businesses. And they just can't, they're too arrogant. They were, in this case, too arrogant to work with each other. And I think that the companies that are really going to define the future of mobility are going to be the ones who are able to bring those together, whether it's partnerships between a high-tech company and an industrial company, or there are several new electric car companies being founded now that I think have learned from Tesla's experience and are trying to leverage that traditional industrial know-how and make it work with sort of a more fast-paced startup culture.
So let's go back to the sort of myth of, self-driving cars.
Yeah.
This is an article in the New York Times, Fast Asleep. Tell us about these videos that we've been seeing. And tell us about the difference. Take us through the difference of driving, autopilot, and self-driving cars.
Self-driving, yeah.
Because I'm confused.
Mm-hmm.
I paid for it in my Tesla.
Right.
I did it one time. That was enough.
A lot of people are confused. In fact, the article that you're talking about where everyone is falling asleep in their cars.
Is that true?
They're also, oh yeah. I mean, I see almost every day there's a new video online of someone either actually sleeping or pretending to sleep. And I think this is so Tesla, if you have to go back to 2013 to kind of understand this. Tesla was, the Model S was out. It was really gotten traction. They were sort of the hot thing. And then all of a sudden, Google shows this funny-looking little car.
Let's show that.
I've got a picture of it right there.
That's
that
you.
One with me
That's
next
you
to
with
it.
the car.
Yeah. They call it the Firefly. Weird-looking little thing, no steering wheel at all, and this was going to drive itself. And
no steering wheel.
Google had been working on self-driving technology for a while. So what we didn't know at the time was that in early 2013, Tesla was once again, it was one of the points where they were in financial trouble, late 2012, early 2013. They actually had a deal with Google, and Google was going to buy them at like a 30% premium on their stock price, and Elon was going to keep running it. It was a very sweet deal. But then Tesla figured out how to borrow money and pay back the government loans and record a profit, and their stock went crazy, and they said, forget it, Google, we don't need you. And after that, that's when Tesla started talking about Autopilot. And Elon Musk's argument was, yeah, Google's working on this thing. Actually, at first he said, maybe we'll work with Google on this. And then he's like, no, they use this LiDAR stuff, this laser scanners that are really expensive. We can do without that and do 90% of driving. So basically highway driving.
Explain this, because you've actually, where's a picture of you riding in a driverless car?
Yeah,
tell us about this.
Okay, well, so this is a real self-driving car. This is what Waymo, which was Google, that Google project, this is what they've been working on. So in 2013, they were, had already made a lot of progress on this, enough to show that little Firefly car. And now, just about a month ago, I was the first journalist to ride in a fully driverless Waymo on public roads.
But is there
So there's no safety driver.
There's no safety driver.
And again, the picture is not the greatest, but there was nobody in the front seats. It was me, and that's it. And I've been in quite a few self-driving cars that had safety drivers, because that's how they test them.
Where
right?
was this?
That was in Chandler, Arizona. It's a suburb of Phoenix.
So you get in the car, and what happens?
So you hail it like an Uber.
An app on your phone?
You pull up an app, and you say, I want to go here. and the car shows up, nobody in it, picks you up, you get in, you close the door, you say, okay, I'm ready to go, and it just drives you there.
No, wait, how fast will it go?
Well, I don't know how fast it will go. We went up to about 45 miles an hour.
It did stop at lights?
Oh, everything.
Take us through this.
Yeah.
Did you ride for a minute or two, or
It was like a 15, 20 minute each way.
did you feel nervous? Were you?
Yeah, it's funny because I've been in a lot of self-driving cars before.
Come on.
No,
come on.
seriously, but always with
A
these-
safety
these
driver.
safety drivers, these test engineers, whose job it is to keep you, in case something horribly goes wrong. So I know the technology exists. I've actually seen over the years it get better and better. But there's still something about getting into one of these cars with no safety net. It's like, right? It's like if you can learn to walk a tightrope, and you think, okay, that's fine, and then you don't have a safety, there's
Yeah.
no net underneath you. It's probably a very different experience. Never actually done it, but I'm assuming.
So Tesla announced self-driving, but it wasn't self-driving.
Yeah.
It was autopilot.
Yeah.
Explain that. What
Yeah,
was that?
so Google had actually developed something that they called Autopilot 2. But Google had let their employees use it and videotaped them to see how they were using it. And sure enough, their employees on their commutes to work were, brushing their teeth, putting on makeup. One guy was using like 2 different devices at the same time while he's on the freeway. And they're like, you know what, this is too dangerous. They said, it's not that the technology is dangerous, it's that the interface, the way the human and the technology interact, right? The technology is good enough that a human can become complacent and not pay attention, but it's not so good that it will actually keep you safe in all conditions, and you don't even need a steering wheel. So it's sort of neither here nor there. And so Google said, we are not going to take this to market. We're just going to do what's called level 4
So they're acting
autonomy.
they were acting responsibly.
They were acting very responsibly, and I think Tesla was acting very irresponsibly when they said, oh, well, we'll just do that if you're not going to do that.
But Tesla tells you up front, only do this on a freeway. Now, the accidents that have happened where the drivers were killed, that was not on freeways.
It actually, some of them were. So,
Really?
yeah, some of them were on highways, some of them were on freeways. So like in the freeways, there was one in Mountain View where there was sort of an off-ramp, and like the lines were sort of blurred, and so then it actually thought that it's called a gore, which is the separates those, that was the lane, and it started tracking that, and it drove the guy directly into a barrier, and he died. In other situations where people were using it where they weren't supposed to use it, like in Florida, it was a non-divided 2-lane highway that had cross traffic, and so a truck turned across. Guy had at least 7 to 10 seconds where he could have seen the vehicle and could have reacted, didn't, and plowed directly into it and was decapitated. And these are the situations, right? So like autopilot, and I understand why people like autopilot, and I think it can be used responsibly.
Who regulates? Is it federal regulation on the self-driving, or is
there's no regulation.
There's no regulation.
That's the dirty secret. Elon Musk keeps talking about regulation. There is none.
There's no.
Zero.
So take us through the future for self-driving cars. Is it going to be trucking? And Elon said 3 years ago, he said, Jamie, in 2 years you'll be able to go on your phone and summon your car across the country.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen?
Not in a Tesla. So I don't think a Tesla will ever actually be self-driving to the extent that you could not have a steering wheel. I genuinely, and I study this technology very closely.
Right.
And the reason is just very simply is that they have one forward radar, and then the rest is just cameras. Okay, and the Waymo, for example, the fully driverless Waymo, it has 360-degree cameras like the Tesla, 360-degree radars, which are much more sophisticated than the one that's in the Tesla, and 360-degree short-range and long-range LiDAR, which is this laser scanner.
Well, that's the most expensive.
Yeah, so the reason Tesla isn't doing what it needs to do real self-driving is because there's no way they could sell those cars. They would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So will it come to trucking?
$1 million.
Will it come to trucking first?
Yeah, so I think what you'll see is there'll be taxis and there'll be trucks and there'll be working vehicles, because each vehicle is going to be so expensive, you can't afford to own it. It's going to have to be out there working 24 hours a day just to pay for itself.
So it would be like robots in the Amazon warehouse, where it's contained, where they are working all the time.
Yeah. So the sooner. The more you can find a limited domain to operate in, a simple domain to operate in, the sooner you can get to autonomy, right? And that's why freeway seems simple,
Yeah.
right? but then Tesla didn't put something on that system that prevents it from being used outside the freeway, right? And it also didn't have a good way to make sure that you are maintaining attention. And I think what we've learned from Tesla really is that autonomy is sort of an all or nothing thing. When you start to blur the line, then all of a sudden people don't really know what they're supposed to do. And there's, by the way, decades of research that human factors, academics and so have done. And it doesn't matter how well educated you are or how much training you have or anything else, like you just get bored. If you don't have enough stimulus and enough to do, you just get bored, you just stop paying attention, you literally cannot, right? We're humans may be bad at drivers, but we're even worse at babysitting a robot that we don't really understand, which is kind of what we're doing. We're kind of like babysitting a teenage driver, essentially, right? And so you can't really relax, you can't go to sleep, you can't do all the things you want to do in a self-driving car, and your body is like telling you to do, your brain is telling you to do. So I think it's kind of an all or nothing thing.
So in your book, you talk about innovations, and you give Elon tremendous credit for the vision and for building the cars and getting them made. But you also talk about disruptive technologies. What is that? What are you referring to when you talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's disruption is a word that's gotten very popular to use. It sounds good, right? And I think in a generic way, it can kind of mean almost anything. It just means you're sort of upsetting the order or whatever.
All right.
Disruption does have a very specific definition, though, and it comes from Clay Christensen, a Harvard Business School guy. And
is Uber disruptive?
So Uber has the potential to be disruptive in that, it replaces a very well-established business buying a car and owning it with the ability to just get a ride whenever you need it. So it competes with, it fundamentally changes how you consume the basic good, which is mobility. Instead of buying one car that has to serve all of your mobility needs, and by the way, that's why people buy trucks and SUVs, right? It's because their 1% use case or their 5% use case might be going up to the mountain to go skiing or taking a load to the dump.
I think it's so funny to see these commercials of driving off-road.
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone driving off-road that I know.
Right.
They're trying.
And some of it is just pure image, right? Some people buy those just for the image.
Yeah.
Others buy it because they use it once in a while. But then if you're owning it, it has to be able to do
So my cousin
all the
owns
things.
4 bars in L.A., and he says 95% of his business is Uber delivered, people coming in Uber and going home.
Yeah, and I think that's the thin end of the wedge for what the real kind of disruption that we're going to see is. I think you can kind of just get a sense from some of these different vehicles.
What is that? What is that?
So this is the Waymo Firefly concept car, which they actually had.
And there's no steering wheel.
No steering wheel. And then the ones above it it's a kind of scooter.
Tell us about so is this a variation of the Birds and the ones we see in LA?
Yeah. So the Birds and the Limes were sort of the first generation of what we call micromobility. And basically, they were a disaster too, by the way. The business doesn't work, the devices themselves were garbage, they didn't
They leave
last.
them outside our gate.
And they
our
get
house.
broken in 4 to 6 weeks at most of those companies. They're losing money, they can't get more investment. It's actually a real disaster. But the
people hurt
underlying
themselves.
the injuries. The underlying idea. So this right here is called Shared. It's a company that's actually only in Portland right now. And it's more of a sit-down. It's a bigger, more solid. It's still electric.
It's like a little Vespa?
It's almost like a little little smaller than a Vespa, but bigger than one of those stand-up scooters. So it's more comfortable. You can do longer distances. It's real nice and stable. Kind of has that cruiser position.
I need 3 wheels on mine.
Yeah. Well, these are really, really wide wheels. So it's
Wide wheels, so
super
you
stable.
won't fall over.
But the point of the scooter thing is that micromobility is disruptive, and it's pointing to this broader disruption.
How does that work?
So it's just like a bird or a lime. You look for one on your phone, and you find the nearest one to you, and you just grab it, and you go, and you leave it wherever you want, and then the next person comes and gets it. And what this is all pointing to, Uber and micromobility.
Who pays for the insurance? Who pays for the
company?
The company pays
The company
for it.
pays insurance, yeah.
So when you sign up on the app, they're paying the insurance, all that.
Yeah.
So you just show up.
Yeah, and
Have you
those
tried-
costs may be going up. Yeah, I've tried those. I actually like those much more than the Bird. So the Bird one, it's that Silicon Valley thing of they just bought as many of the cheapest thing as they could and just got them out
They were
there.
banned in Beverly Hills. They showed up one day.
Yeah.
The next thing, 2 months later, Pat, they were all being banned because they were all over the place.
Oh yeah, and they didn't cooperate with cities at all. They didn't
No.
go and ask permission. Yeah, no. So there was a lot of like bad tech sector behavior, but they were doing the sort of fail fast thing where they figured out, okay, like these don't work. But the idea underlying all this is really a good one, a really important one, because people think it's very easy to think, having had cars monopolize, be a monoculture for our mobility needs for 100 years, it's very easy to think, well, what comes next is going to be just a different version of the car, right? Like that's so ingrained in how we think about getting around that the car defines everything. In fact, the fact that we call them self-driving cars, they're not necessarily going to be what we think of as cars. They're going to be, a lot of them are going to be maybe even closer to a bus than a car, but a bus that, maybe where you have a little bit of privacy for yourself. It'll pick you up at your house and drop you off exactly where you want to go because it's able to use dynamic routing.
So
these lines
buses.
are gonna blur, and because the core thing that's happening here is we're moving from the automotive monoculture to something, to a really broad diversity of options. Because what you can do when you have an app like Uber, and even Uber and Lyft are starting to do this, where they will give you, and actually even a better way to see this is Google Maps. Because in Google Maps, you have car directions, you have bus directions, you have train directions, you have bicycle directions, you have walking directions. And so what's happening essentially is that we are going to be given a whole lot of tools for on-demand mobility, and we're going to be able to choose the right one for that job. We don't have to now buy a vehicle.
So are millennials buying less cars because they're living in the city and they're using Uber and Lyft and they rent a car when they go away on the weekend?
Yeah, I think it's actually more correlated to living in a city than even a certain age.
Really?
Folks of all ages, if you live in a city, think about it, especially parking, which is actually subsidized in a lot of cities, and yeah.
They help pay for the parking?
Yeah, a lot of cities actually require businesses to put a certain number of parking spots in, and those are free, and it encourages people to come there, but then it also encourages congestion. And so more and more, and what the micromobility is showing is, okay, so yeah, we have issues around cars with, emissions and pollution, and a Tesla takes care of that. But
Right.
a Tesla's stuck in traffic like every other car. And if you only have to go 2 miles, why would you be stuck in traffic in this giant, like 5,000-pound car when you could just pick up a little thing, spend $2, and get there faster because you can go in a bike lane, and you're not having to deal with the congestion? And so I think congestion is one of the things that's really sort of driving this transition to using the right tool for every trip.
All right, so I always have to ask you, as you're one of the great observers of the car business, you're really an insider. So Tesla stock opened at 17. I was lucky enough to get in some stock, but it's now 337. What's the future?
I really, really, really tried to avoid talking about Tesla stock at all. Actually, if you read in the book, the company accused me in 2016 after I wrote a story of shorting their stock, which is not true. I never have. I never would. But they said I was, and they put that, they kind of make all criticism out to be, about the stock price and about trying to hurt their stock price. I'm not going to guess. I will say, I say in the book, like, I do think that, when you have a business that requires, $1 to $2 billion of cash be injected into it every 12 to 18 months or every 12 to 24 months, that is, that can't go forever.
It's a little different than making phones by Foxconn in Taiwan, right?
Exactly. Apple prints money. And one of the reasons Apple prints money too, by the way, is because they're not just in the hardware business. The hardware is also a platform for apps.
Right.
And Elon's been talking about an app store for the Model S since 2012,
Right.
and it hasn't happened. And I think there's some good reasons for that. But cars are not smartphones. And I think we want cars to be like smartphones because smartphones have changed and improved so much. But cars are still cars. And we can bring some of the good things about smartphones to cars, but I think it's really important not to lose sight of the fact that cars are cars, and especially when you get to the parts of the market where people don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of time, can't afford to not have their car working, or those parts of the market, they know there's no illusion for them about whether they want a car or a smartphone. They want the car. at least at this point.
Edward, it's been great having you here. I want you to come back to the Rise Festival in 2021, and maybe you'll bring some from Waymo for... How many people here own a Tesla? So, see? So Edward is here. We got 15 minutes for Q&A.
Here's the first question.
David
right
Bryant.
here.
David Bryant. He's former
Thank
director
you.
of operations.
The question I have, I guess I sound a little antique with this, but I think the nation is schizophrenic, and so is California, in the production of electricity to recharge the batteries. Will the electric cars of the future have the means to self-generate the electricity to recharge the batteries? If not, I would like to invent that.
Yeah, I don't know about self-generating. I mean, I think the different places around the world like have different grid issues, and some it's just the stability, others it's the use of coal. The beauty of electric vehicles, though, is that it doesn't really matter what state the grid is in now. If you move to electric vehicles, then you can green the grid over time, and the cars get greener and greener, whereas a gas car will always be exactly as polluted. Actually, it'll probably pollute a little bit more as it ages. Whereas EVs, as that grid gets more green, it will become more green.
Okay. Bryn?
Hi, I'll stand up. Uber released a not-so-good safety report yesterday. Could you talk about your opinion on that?
What was the question?
Uber released a not very favorable safety report yesterday, and I wanted to know what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to read it.
Why not?
Because I've been driving down here. I drove down from Portland, Oregon, so I've spent the last 2 days in the car. And I've talked to some friends who follow them closely. Look, I think Uber is also a really important company. Just like Tesla, I think we need to pay close attention to not just the good impacts that they've had, but also really where they've struggled, because they are another one of these companies where the lessons of their experience is going to be really impactful in the future. And I think one of the things that we've learned from both Uber and from Tesla is that bringing software attitudes into not just hardware, but safety critical hardware. You can't just take that same attitude and just port it directly over. Safety critical hardware requires a very specific approach. And it's very easy to look at car companies and say, oh, they move so slow, they're such dinosaurs, they're so stuck in their ways. But again, a lot of the reasons that they move slow are very, very good ones, including that you have to really think deeply and test extensively in order to have confidence that your safety practices are actually good. Now, that's on the design of the vehicle side, but I think you can apply a lot of that thinking to the operations of a ride-hailing platform as well. And I think that Uber has consistently prioritized scaling as fast as they can at all costs.
I can't imagine a world without Uber.
I mean, I can't either, but I mean, they also lost $5 billion last quarter. Or not last quarter, but in the first quarter of this year. They're losing a lot of money, and they have some very, very serious issues. And so,
We have a question in the back here.
Yeah, I just recently bought Tesla
Stand up.
stock.
Stand up. Let's see you.
We just recently bought Tesla stock, and we think of it more as an ethical investment. Just wanting to support the idea of going green.
Do you have solar panels on your house?
Well, pardon?
Do you have solar panels on your house?
No. Well,
Next step.
We live in a condo.
Oh, there you go. Thank
And
you.
even charging my Tesla in the condo is not happening yet. I have to go to charge point stations.
this is actually a big challenge.
Yeah. Well, I've been lucky so far, but they're getting busy because there's a lot more electric cars in the neighborhood, which is a good thing.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I've just noticed a lot of people writing about the whole idea are probably missing out on just the moral debt that some people feel to support the idea of the whole electric car industry.
Good question. Thank you.
Well, I mean,
You
it
talk to
seems to me not an investment expert, and don't give advice about investment or anything like that. I mean, if a company has always lost money, I mean, yeah, you have to have some other reason to be investing in it. And Tesla has built an extremely powerful brand that people want to support, and that's great. But I think that every business eventually has to mature and has to reach a point where it is operationally sound. and I haven't seen.
What happens if Elon gets tired of it and moves on to something else?
It's a huge issue because also the company internally is extremely dependent on him. It's not just that from the outside, like the image of the company depends on him being involved. Internally, he has made, and frankly, I think this is probably the biggest criticism that can really be made of him, is that, right, like that's the ultimate failure of leadership, is building an institution that can't survive without you.
If you had huge turnover of top talent,
Yep,
a friend of mine is
huge
on the
turnover.
board, just went off the board, said that they're worried about that.
Yep.
Next question,
So Jamie,
Dr. Barry Uso.
I'm here today because of my Tesla.
Thank you.
I was driving in the HOV lane to LA. I don't know LA very well. We were going about 75, 80 miles an hour, and I had the Autopilot on. I looked at the map, glanced at the map, and all of a sudden the car just slammed into the braking mode, and I was about a foot away from the car in front of me. I mean, had I not had that car, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
Good God, that's a great story. Testimony.
But would you have been looking at the map if you didn't have that giant screen there?
My wife would have been looking at the map. No, but I use the Autopilot all the time,
Yeah.
and I find it to be
It breaks.
easy to use.
That's,
Yeah.
Garrett,
No,
Barry, that's a great point. Everyone
and-
hear that?
Right back there, young lady.
Hi. I
Hi.
stole my question from behind me, but we wanted to know what kind of car you drive.
I have, so between my partner and myself, we have a Subaru Impreza. We have which is our first car out of college. We have a Toyota Tacoma because we spend all of our free time either in the mountains or in the desert in Oregon. And we do actually drive it off-road. We are one of the rare people that actually do that. And then my fun car is a 1999 BMW Z3 M Coupe, which is a very weird car. And actually, I like it because, you know,
No one's seen it.
Because I love that car, but it was an absolute disaster as a business. And it's funny because the guy I bought it from used to be a BMW dealer, and he said when these cars were new, I hated them because nobody wanted to buy them. It's a sports car, but it's got this big hatchback on the back that's kind of weird and awkward looking.
Add it on. It looks like
And he's like, it's my favorite car as a used car salesman to sell because now people just love them. They've only made like very few of them, and people are super passionate about them. But when they were new, I hated them.
Okay,
And
we
so
got it.
It's important to
Next
separate
question.
the
Down
business
front.
and the emotion of cars.
Ned-
Down
Bender.
front.
I've been a Tesla owner since the beginning. So I have very rarely at the beginning ever went to a charge station. But we then started spending the summers at the beach and finding that you had to wait in line 45, 50 minutes to charge your car. The other side of that is that Tesla will charge in 55 minutes, 80% charge. I was on a trip recently with someone who has lots of cars, and he said, I just ordered the Porsche electric car. I said, are you crazy? Where are you going to charge it? And he said, well, I never thought about that. And I said, you know, Tesla is way ahead of everybody with charge stations. And for those of you that don't own a Tesla, you can't charge any other car at a Tesla station. So what's going to happen with the Porsches and
Good question.
the Rolls Royces and the Bentleys that think they're going to make an electric car?
So you remember Dieselgate when Volkswagen got caught with cheating on their diesel emissions?
Yep.
Part of their settlement for that, and I don't remember how many $1 billion they have to spend, but they had to spend a huge chunk in the billions of dollars on an EV charging network. It's called Electrify America, and it is high speed. It's still being built out. It's not all the way there yet, but that's going to be very big. I think their plan is to have it be, at least in the US, at least as big as the Tesla one. In addition to that, I know that Porsche is putting chargers at their dealership, and they're saying people can just come to the nearest dealership and charge there. And I think the one thing that it's funny, we had the comment about charging in an apartment. I think that for the early adopters who are buying a more premium car and want to have a certain experience around it, having that ability to road trip with an electric car is it's a way to bring excitement back to cars. You're doing something kind of pioneering, and it gives you an experience that people haven't had since the turn of the century when cars were still new. Of going out and having these road trips that are kind of an adventure in a certain way. But I think that ultimately, as you get into the more mass market and you have people who are really just using the cars for point A to point B, I think the bigger challenge for EVs is actually home charging for people who live in apartments. Because electric cars work best in big cities. And
But in LA, in LA, every condo, every building has to have chargers.
yeah,
for
so
electric cars.
so some places are solving that. faster
Next
than
question.
Hi. Okay, this is a two-parter. Volvo has teamed up with Israeli technology for years. Two-part question. Is it a problem with Tesla? And how come we don't hear enough about it?
Well,
others. Is what a problem?
The competition, Israeli technology and Volvo.
Mo-
Yeah,
that's
Mobilize. the Israeli
Mobilize,
company you're
Tesla
talking
had it.
about. Yeah. Look, there are a lot of companies investing a lot of money in self-driving cars. And the technology has come very far. Waymo, Google is one of them, as we saw. And like I said, that's a vehicle that, if you're part of their program in Chandler, you can go and have a fully driverless ride that you order from your phone. The thing about self-driving, though, is that it's been approached as purely a technological problem. And as we get closer and closer to solving the technological problem, it turns out there's all kinds of other problems or challenges around it that aren't technological. And the biggest one is just the business. How do you make a business work when the car costs $600,000, for each one? I mean, it has to be, and that's why I think, and again, we think about self-driving cars as something that's going to come and replace our car, right? Because that's how we think about getting around. And I think, what's really going to happen is that these are going to be working vehicles that we won't really own. They'll be like sort of Uber type of services, as well as delivery and trucking and all those other sorts of things that we
Will we
talked
have
about.
trucks going across the country carrying, self-driving trucks carrying cargo?
Yeah, so actually in Florida, there's already a company that does a really interesting, it's a combination, they have nobody in the truck. So in the state of Florida, you can have a fully driverless vehicle. What they do is they actually have remote control. So they have someone sitting there operating the vehicle from their computer, remote controlling through a cell phone connection. And they're driving it, and then once on the freeway, it's sort of automated. And the beauty of that is it solves the problem of, it's hard to get truckers, hire truckers because they want to go home to their families at night. And this way, you don't get rid of the driver because it's not fully 100% autonomous, but by not having them in the vehicle, it's easier to hire someone because they can then go and spend the night with their family.
There you go.
I just own one now, but I'm concerned because I can't go anywhere. I realize I cannot own an EV car only because I have to stay, as you say, around the area. What is being done by hotels for making sure that if you book a room, you will get a charging station?
Well, they have them. They have them.
Yeah, so Tesla has done a lot of partnerships. I think
I'm not a Tesla. I'm not a Tesla.
Not a Tesla for
No.
other yeah. Not enough, right? And I think Tesla had an easier shot at doing that because they were a luxury sort of premium brand, and it was very easy to get hotels to want to associate with their brand. Whereas with general EVs, it's a little harder. So a lot more has to be done, and I'm sure that other companies will look at what Tesla did with those partnerships, and we'll follow suit.
We have one more question, and then Edward's going to be outside signing your books, and I hope you give him a warm Rancho Mirage welcome. Last question.
So my question is this. Back in September, I was looking for a four-door, four-seater car. Up until then, I had only two-seaters, and it was a problem every time I had guests. I had to rent a car or whatever. So I decided to buy one. So I looked at BMW, of which I had many in previous years. I was looking at the new G70 from Genesis and Tesla Model 3. Well, I selected Tesla Model 3. I'm very happy with it, by the way. But the question is this. Tesla actually has forced, together with some of the environmental laws in Europe primarily and in China, the traditional car companies to actually go into electric cars more and more. And if I look at BMW, which started actually way before Tesla, and in fact GM actually started way before Tesla even thought about electric cars, we're seeing now a whole series of cars and actually even trucks coming into the market. How do you see this traditional manufacturers' impact on the Tesla in the future?
That's a really good question, and we only know what we know, right? So we can speculate about certain things, but what we do know is that Tesla hasn't been able to make money with no competition. It's hard to imagine that adding more competition will make that easier for them. Now, again, I don't know. But it's also important to remember that, not every, like what sets Tesla really apart from every other car maker essentially is that they've sold electric cars that people really do want or have wanted, whereas there's been a lot of electric cars that, people said, oh, I want to save the planet, and Nissan said, in 2011, Nissan invested in the capacity to build 500,000 Nissan Leafs every year. 500,000, 500,000 a year. And they cumulatively haven't even sold like 400,000 cumulative since 2011. And that's how car companies lose money, is they invest too much in capacity because they think there's a market there, and if the market's not there, then you can't make that business work. And so, it's really nice to believe that like everyone is going to go electric tomorrow or in a year or two, or that the market is just going to shift overnight. But the reality is that this is happening slowly. It's not always successful. That a lot of electric cars, unfortunately, have flopped. What we do know is that there's what Tesla has created, like I said in the slide, is a strong premium market. People who are willing to pay more for a car, they want a car that says something about them, those people are increasingly moving towards electric cars. And so you see Porsche and
Edward,
Range
thank you.
Rover.
Will you come back to Rancho Mirage?
I will, absolutely.
Please give them a nice thank you.
And maybe we'll see.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.